I didn't notice them at first, or maybe I did, but I told myself it was nothing. Living in the city, you see so many people every day that faces blur together. Strangers on the train, in coffee shops, on a crowded sidewalks. You stop paying attention, or at least you try. It wasn't until the third time I saw them that I started to feel uneasy. It was late one evening, and I was walking home from work. My neighborhood isn't great, but it's not bad either. Just rows of aging brick buildings and the hum of distant traffic. I turned onto my street and caught a glimpse of someone lingering at the far end, half hidden by a lamppost. They were tall, wearing a hoodie with the hood pulled low. Not unusual, but they were standing still, not walking, not doing anything, just watching. I didn't think much of it then. Maybe they were waiting for someone, I thought. Still, I locked my door the second I got inside. A few nights later, I saw them again. Same place, same stance, but this time they were closer. I couldn't make out their face, just the shadow of their hood and the dull glow of the streetlights behind them. The third time, they weren't across the street. They were on my side. I remember freezing. It was dusk, that in-between time when the city seems to hold its breath. The streets were unusually empty, and I was carrying groceries, fumbling with my keys. I looked up, and there they were, standing about 50 feet away. I didn't even pretend not to notice. I stared straight at them, hoping they'd move, do something to prove they weren't actually interested in me. They didn't. I rushed inside, bolted the door, and spent the rest of the night peeking through my blinds. They were gone by then, but that didn't make me feel better. The worst part wasn't seeing them. It was the little things, the things that made me question if I was losing my mind. One morning, I couldn't find my spare keys. I always leave them in the same drawer by the front door, but they weren't there. A few days later, they reappeared, sitting neatly on my kitchen counter. I told myself I must have misplaced them, but deep down, I knew better. Another time, I came home to find my mail scattered on the floor. My mailbox was locked, as always, but the letters were arranged in a strange way, spread out, almost like someone had been going through them. I started changing my routines. I took different routes to and from work. I stopped going out after dark. I even bought pepper spray and kept it in my pocket at all times, but no matter what I did, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being followed. One night, everything came to a head. I had stayed late at work, finishing a project, and by the time I left, the streets were eerily quiet. The air was heavy with the smell of rain, though none had fallen yet, and the streetlights buzzed faintly overhead. As I walked, I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see them, but the sidewalks were empty. For the first time in weeks, I thought maybe it was over. Then I heard it. Footsteps. Soft, deliberate, keeping pace with mine. I stopped walking, so did they. I turned around slowly, and there they were, standing in the shadows, just far enough away that I couldn't make out their face. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst. "What do you want?" I shouted, my voice trembling. They didn't answer. They just tilted their heads slightly, like they were studying me. Then, without a word, they stepped forward into the light. My stomach dropped. It was my neighbor, the quiet one who lived 2 doors down. We'd barely spoken, just polite nods in the hallway, the occasional hello. I'd never even learned their name. "You left your door unlocked once," they said, their voice calm, almost conversational. "I wanted to make sure you were safe." The words chilled me to my core. "I've been looking out for you," they continued, as if that explained everything. I backed away, fumbling for my pepper spray. My hands were shaking so badly I dropped it. "I just wanted to keep you safe," they repeated, stepping closer. I don't remember screaming, but I must have, because someone else, a passerby maybe, came running, and my stalker vanished into the night. The police took my report, but nothing ever came of it. My neighbor moved out a week later. To this day, I don't know how much of my life they invaded. I changed my locks, moved apartments, even changed jobs. But sometimes late at night, I still feel like I'm being watched. Because the worst part of all, they never needed to break in. My door was always locked. I never thought much about the bus stop outside my apartment. It was just a bench with a cracked plexiglass shelter, the kind you find on every other corner in the city. People came and went without a word, absorbed in their own worlds, scrolling through their phones or staring into space. It wasn't until I started seeing him there that I noticed something was wrong. The first time it was late at night. I'd just gotten home from work and the street was quiet except for the distant hum of traffic. He was sitting on the bench, his head down, wearing a gray jacket and a baseball cap pulled low. At first I thought he might be waiting for the last bus, but the buses stopped running an hour ago. I told myself he probably didn't know the schedule, that he'd leave soon. And yet, as I unlocked my building's door and glanced back, he was still there. Completely still, like a statue. The next night, he was there again. Same bench, same jacket, same blank stillness. I lingered near the entrance, pretending to check my phone, hoping he'd leave. But he didn't. This time he looked up just for a second, and I saw his face. His eyes locked with mine, cold and unblinking. I hurried inside and didn't sleep well that night. Over the next week, he became a fixture. He'd sit on that bench at all hours, day or night. Sometimes he'd be staring straight ahead. Other times his head would be down like he was asleep. I tried convincing myself it wasn't strange. Maybe he was homeless, or just had nowhere else to go, but it felt strange. One morning I left for work early and found a single cigarette butt on the windowsill outside my apartment. I don't smoke, and the sill is too high for someone to reach from the street. That night I drew my curtains and avoided the windows, but I couldn't help myself. Around midnight I peeked through a tiny gap. He was staring at my building. The next day I called the police. They said they'd send someone by to check it out, but when they came, the man was gone. Probably just a vagrant, the officer said with a shrug. Let us know if he causes any trouble. The problem was, he didn't cause trouble. He didn't approach me, didn't try to talk to me, didn't do anything that could be classified as a crime. He just watched. The bus stop began to feel like a stage, and I was the only audience member. Every time I left my apartment, I'd see him out of the corner of my eye, sitting there with that unnerving stillness. One day, I decided to take a different route home. I walked 4 blocks out of my way, certain that if I avoided the bus stop, I'd avoid him. But when I turned onto my street, he was there. He wasn't at the bus stop this time. He was standing on the opposite sidewalk, facing my building. I froze. My mouth went dry and my pulse pounded in my ears. He didn't move, didn't even flinch, but I could feel his eyes following me as I hurried to my door. That night, I locked myself in my apartment and shoved a chair under the doorknob for good measure. I sat in the dark, staring at the peephole, listening for footsteps in the hall. Around 3 a.m., I heard it. A single, deliberate knock. I couldn't breathe. My hand hovered over my phone, but I didn't call anyone. I didn't want to make a sound. The knock came again, and then nothing. The next morning, I found an envelope slipped under my door. It was blank except for my name, written in shaky block letters. Inside was a photo. It was a picture of me sitting in my apartment, taken from outside my window. I packed my bags that day and stayed at a friend's place for a week. When I finally worked up the nerve to come back, the man was gone. I don't know what scared him off or if he even left on his own. I changed the locks, got new curtains, even installed cameras. But sometimes late at night, I still think about the bus stop, and I wonder if he's waiting for me to come back. It started with a single phone call. I was cooking dinner when my phone buzzed on the counter, an unfamiliar number flashing across the screen. Normally, I wouldn't have answered, but I'd been waiting for a call back from a repair guy about my leaky faucet. Hello? There was silence on the other end. Hello? I repeated, louder this time. Still nothing, just a faint static hum. I hung up and went back to chopping vegetables, chalking it up to a misdial. That night, as I was getting into bed, the same number called again. Who is this? I demanded. No answer. I blocked the number, annoyed, and went to sleep. The next morning, I woke to find a voicemail from another unknown number. The message was only 5 seconds long, just static, with what sounded like faint breathing in the background. Over the next few days, the calls kept coming. Different numbers every time, always silent or worse, filled with that faint, unsettling sound of someone breathing on the other end. I started keeping my phone on silent, but the missed calls piled up anyway. It wasn't just the calls, though. One evening, I noticed my apartment door was unlocked when I got home. I always double-check it before leaving, but I told myself I must have been in a hurry that morning. Then, 2 days later, I found my bathroom mirror fogged up with streaks running down the glass, as if someone had been breathing heavily right in front of it. I live alone. By the time the text started, I was already on edge. The first one came late at night. I'm outside. I rushed to my window, heart pounding, but the street below was empty except for a stray car passing by. I didn't sleep that night. The next day, there was another text. Do you miss me? I tried to ignore it, but as the days went on, the messages became more personal. They knew my name, my daily schedule, even the color of the shirt I was wearing that morning. It got worse. One Friday evening, I stayed late at the office, hoping to avoid going home. When I finally left, the streets were quiet, bathed in the flickering glow of streetlights. My car was parked 2 blocks away, and as I walked, I kept checking over my shoulder. About halfway there, I spotted someone in the distance. They were standing on the corner, under a broken streetlight. At first, I couldn't make out any details, just a dark figure, motionless, facing me. As I got closer, I realized they were wearing a mask. It wasn't a Halloween mask, nothing grotesque or overly dramatic. It was simple, plain white, with empty black holes for eyes. I froze, clutching my keys so hard they bit into my palm. "Who are you?" I shouted. My voice echoed down the empty street. They didn't move. I backed away, heart hammering in my chest, and bolted from my car. By the time I started the engine and looked back, the figure was gone. When I got home, there was another text waiting for me. "Nice seeing you tonight." I called the police. They sent an officer to take a report, but there wasn't much they could do. "Probably just someone messing with you," the officer said, trying to reassure me. "Let us know if it escalates." It escalated. A week later, I came home to find a photograph slipped under my door. It was a picture of me, taken the night I'd seen the masked figure. The angle was high, like it had been taken from the roof of a building. In the photo, I was running to my car, my face twisted in fear. I stopped going home after that. I stayed with a friend, but even there, I felt like I was being watched. One night, as I sat in their living room scrolling through my phone, a message popped up. "You can't hide." The next morning, I found another photograph taped to my friend's door. This one was taken from inside their apartment. It was a picture of me, asleep on their couch. I went to the police again, but they couldn't find any sign of forced entry, and without knowing who was behind it, they couldn't do much else. Eventually, I moved to a new city, changed my number, and stopped using social media. For a while, I felt safe. I even started sleeping through the night again. But last week, I got a package in the mail. Inside was a single plain white mask and a note that said, "Did you miss me?